Have you ever heard of winning a battle but losing the war? It sounds like a contradiction, right? Well, today we're diving into one of the most famous and tragic examples of exactly that, the Battle of Saigon during the Tet Offensive.
All right, so picture this. It's Saigon, late January 1968. The city is buzzing. It's time for Tet, the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, which is by far the biggest holiday of the year.
This was supposed to be a break from the fighting. You know, a time for family, for celebration, for peace. There was even an informal truce in place. The whole city was just wrapped up in the holiday spirit. But here's the thing. Underneath all that noise, the happy sounds of firecrackers celebrating the new year, something else was stirring. Those pops and bangs provided the absolute perfect cover for the sounds of gunfire. The war hadn't paused. It had just arrived on the capital's doorstep. So how on earth did a holiday truce just explode into one of the most pivotal battles of the entire Vietnam War? Let's get into it. What went down in Saigon wasn't an isolated event. It was actually the main event of a much, much bigger plan, the Tet Offensive. This was a gigantic, perfectly coordinated surprise attack by North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, hitting dozens of cities and bases all across South Vietnam, pretty much all at the same time. And the absolute centerpiece of this whole operation was the fight for Saigon. Now, the goal wasn't to completely take over the country. They knew that was probably impossible. The real plan? To land a knockout psychological blow. So get this. A force of 35 Viet Cong battalions, many of them their best fighters, swarmed the city. Their mission was simple but audacious. Hit the enemy where they felt the most secure and shatter their will to fight. And just look at the list of targets. This was anything but random. They were aiming right for the heart, the nerve centers of both the South Vietnamese government and the American military. We're talking military headquarters, the presidential palace, the giant airbase, and yes, even the U.S. Embassy itself. And this wasn't just happening in the city center. While these elite units were hitting those key targets, other divisions were hammering the big American and South Vietnamese bases around Saigon. The idea was to keep reinforcements pinned down. It was, for all intents and purposes, an all-out assault. Now, militarily, the attack on Saigon was, believe it or not, a failure. The attackers would eventually be pushed back. But the war wasn't just being fought in the streets of Saigon. It was being fought on TV screens and in newspapers all the way back in the United States. And one single moment, captured on film, was about to change everything. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces actually won the battle for Saigon, why is it remembered as such a disaster for them? Well, the answer has less to do with guns and grenades and more to do with a camera. I mean, even the top U.S. commander in Vietnam, General Westmoreland, he knew what had happened. He tried to downplay it as just one incident, but he had to admit it was a massive psychological blow. Okay, let's just walk through how this all unfolded. The offensive kicks off on January 30th. Just 2 days later, on February 1st, a Viet Cong prisoner is captured in Saigon. He's dragged through the street, brought before a South Vietnamese general, and executed right there, on the spot. And an Associated Press photographer named Eddie Adams was right there to capture the whole thing. So let's just quickly break down who we're looking at in this infamous photo. You've got General Nguyen Ngoc Loan. He was the chief of the South Vietnamese National Police. Then there's the prisoner, Nguyen Van Lem, an alleged Viet Cong captain from what they called an assassination platoon. And of course, behind the camera, you have Eddie Adams, whose picture would go on to win the Pulitzer Prize. Now, the photo itself is just brutal, but it didn't tell the entire story. The prisoner, Lem, was accused of having just murdered the family of one of General Loan's closest friends. According to the reports the general was getting, this also included Loan's own 6 godchildren. So for General Loan, this was apparently deeply, deeply personal. So let's tie this all together. Let's connect the brutal street fighting with this one single shocking image to really understand the battle's bizarre and paradoxical outcome. This right here, this explains everything. You're looking at 2 totally different realities of the same battle. On the left, you've got the military result, a decisive win. The Viet Cong were thrown out of Saigon, they failed to achieve their objectives, and they took horrific casualties. But look at the right, the political result, an absolute disaster. The sheer shock of the attack, combined with the brutality of that photo, lit a fire under the anti-war movement back in the States and completely destroyed the official story that the war was almost over. And even after the main assault was crushed, the fight wasn't over. It dragged on for more than a month, with brutal house-to-house fighting and heavy airstrikes that turned huge parts of Saigon, especially the crowded Cholon district, into nothing but rubble.
And the human cost of this period was it's hard to even comprehend. The 6 months after the Tet Offensive began were the deadliest of the entire war for American troops. The casualty rates were higher than in the Korean War, higher even than in major battles of World War II.
Which leaves us with this one final, really tough question. The Battle of Saigon shows that you can absolutely win a fight on the ground. But if that victory costs you public support, if it makes people at home turn against the war, have you really won anything at all?